Well, hello, world. Good day, good evening, wherever you're at. Today, we have Josh Kreitz with Developer Relations, and we're going to be talking about getting started with Celo. Specifically, what are the fastest ways to rapidly prototype? What tooling's available? Josh, you have so much information in regards to this. You're considered a bit of a Celo veteran. So, do you want to kick things off and give the goods to the community? What can we do to rapidly prototype? What tooling's available?
Yeah, I think some context is useful here in terms of talking about how similar Celo is to like the existing like Web3 space, particularly Ethereum, since that is the most popular smart contract blockchain and just like developer platform right now. So Celo is running a fork of Ethereum. The Ethereum clients, it's running a fork of Geth, so it's running the same clients, it's running the EVM. So a lot of the developer tooling for writing smart contracts that works for Ethereum just works for Celo. So when I'm thinking about like rapid prototyping, building things for a hackathon, and like getting started with Celo, when I'm hacking on stuff on Celo, I often just use Ethereum developer tools without any modification. So Celo actually accepts Ethereum style transactions. You can use Ethereum tools to interact with Celo directly. You just have to point your tool to a Celo endpoint instead of an Ethereum endpoint. So that means you can use Metamask, you can use Remix, you can use Web3.js, you can use Ethers.js, you can use Truffle and Hardhat. There's just some slight configuration that you have to do before you can use it. So yeah, that's the easiest way to get started. I'd be happy to share my screen and show. I actually have Remix up right now. I was just talking to some Celo Camp folks about deploying contracts and how we do that. So I can share my screen and show like how easy it is to get started deploying on Remix.
Maybe that would be great.
Do that.
Yeah, definitely share the screen. I think participants would love to view and see what's going on. Thank you for preparing this today.
Yeah. Let me get my windows situated. I can share. Yeah, I'll share my. I have to share my full screen because if you want to see what MetaMask is doing, it doesn't show up if you're sharing a window or a tab. So I actually have VS Code over here, which we will probably talk about in a little bit. I have a cool contracts repo that I'll actually drop in the chat because it shows how to get started with very basic contracts using Truffle, as well as like creating like the simplest web page possible that connects to MetaMask to a deployed contract. But first, let's look at Remix because it's super easy to get started. Basically, when you land on Remix, you'll see this page and it's asking like, hey, what do you want to, like, what are you using to develop? I usually just write contracts in Solidity. That's what I'm most familiar with. It's been around the longest. So you can just click this Solidity plugin and it will basically add the Solidity compiler to Remix for you. But on the top left here, this might be a little small here, so let me make it bigger. On the top left here, you can look at all the contracts we have. Usually Remix just comes with these 3 examples. It's like a simple storage contract where it just stores a number, like ownership contract. That is a common pattern in Solidity where you can specify somebody with like elevated access to contract functions and then a ballot, like a voting application. I was actually deploying some Moloch DAO contracts recently with some community members. So I have some Moloch contracts in here, but we'll just see how easy it is to deploy the storage contract. So I'll basically just select the storage contract, go to the Solidity compiler, select the version of Solidity that I want. Looks like this contract needs between 7 and 9, so let's just use 8.2. Looks like the contract's compiling. These are the Moloch DAO pairs and you compile storage.sol. My Remix has been a little slow because Remix is doing everything in the browser right here. You're writing contracts, you get syntax highlighting here. You have a compiler. I have a bunch of contracts. That looks like Remix is choking.
I love
sometimes
it when
if you have sometimes if you have too much information in here, the browser's not the best IDE because it's not the fastest, and it can get bogged down. So let me.
But after your browser's refresh, the experience is actually quite pleasant for rapid prototyping. You go in, craft your smart contract, test it out, and just focus on the contract side of things. And what I love most about Remix is the ability to test in the virtual machine before you even touch a blockchain. Like you can just go ahead and test all your methods, make sure things are working as expected to fulfill the backend services for your decentralized app. This is probably, I want to say, not probably, this is one of my favorite Ethereum-based tooling that's ever been implemented. I remember the moment that this was released to the space. I was like, what? This is available? And then previously to our hard fork, we had to actually depend on a plugin. And now since the Donut hard fork, you're literally able to get right into Remix and not have any compatibility issues.
Let me try my other
Give it a shot on Brave.
Browser. I have like my C Labs Brave and then my personal Brave, just to help keep all my accounts straight. And this one it's much simpler here. I don't have as much. I have a ton of contracts in my C Labs Remix just because I use it all the time. It's so handy. Let me just, like it just instantly compiled, no problem. Let me see. So basically, I just compiled the contract, and now if I go to deploy and run transactions, I can select injected Web3. Let me select the appropriate network.
Hey, Josh, why would you want to immediately eject to Web3? You want to share why that's important?
Yes. There's going to see all my accounts. Nice. Let me create a new account. So basically, in this development environment, you can deploy contracts to Remix locally in a test environment. So if I select JavaScript VM, it's going to run the simulated blockchain in the browser, and then just do all this stuff locally. It's really rapid for local testing. All transactions are instant, but it's not over any public network. It's not, there's no backup. So when I basically close Remix and come back, there's no saved contract deployments. There's no saved storage or anything. If you select injected Web3, this allows you to connect to Metamask. So as you saw me messing with Metamask, I can select injected Web3, and this allows me to connect to whatever network that Metamask is connected to. So you can see, like, it's kind of small here, but I'm connected to custom network 4478, which is the chain ID for the Alpohorax test network on Celo. So now if I contract deployment, send transactions to Remix, this is actually going to the live test net, which is persistent. So if I come back, I can revisit my contracts. I can also share these contracts with other people. I can create interfaces and then share the connections to the interfaces, and allow people just to interact with these testnet contracts. I can also just do this on Celo mainnet. So I can connect to Celo mainnet and just very rapidly deploy contracts. Let me get my address. I'm going to go to the faucet real quick and get some Celo, because to send any transactions on this network, I need to have Celo to pay for the transactions. The crosswalks, there's one. That should be it. Okay, so this faucet is going to send my account some Celo. We should see it pop up shortly. There we go. Okay, so now I have 5 Celo. Something to note when using like Remix and MetaMask, since these are Ethereum tools, the transaction structure is the same, where you're paying transaction fees in the native asset of the blockchain. So on Ethereum, that's ETH. On Celo, that's Celo. You can't pay transaction fees in alternative currencies when you're using these Ethereum tools, because there's no concept of a fee currency field in a transaction object in these Ethereum tools like there is in Celo. But in the developer's case, I don't think that's a huge barrier, just because we're dealing with so many other like low-level tools. It's actually pretty easy to get Celo relative to a lot of the other things we're doing. So I think it's fine to expect developers to pay transaction fees in Celo. It's more like the alternative fee currencies is really beneficial for end users. But
Gosh, it's worth mentioning like why that happens, right? Like we are an EVM compatible chain, and it seems like that we're the EVM because we're trying to focus on expanding and building out not only the platform but the tool sets that are available. The difference is within the block headers, right? Like the blockchain and the headers, we have different options available to us specifically for the fee currency, where that's not available on Ethereum. So that's the main reason why it's not there with tooling. But that could change. Does ETH 2.0 have the alternative currency? I don't believe so.
Nope. There's as far as I know, there's no plans for that. It's actually at it's at the transaction level as well. There's like a certain number. There's like 5 or 7 fields with a transaction, and in Celo, transaction objects is an actual fee currency. So it's not just headers. It's the actual every single transaction has this option. And oftentimes, like with Ethereum tools, it's just left blank. And at the protocol level, if it's blank, the protocol, like the clients will automatically fill that data to make it valid transactions.
Yeah, the header is pretty much the structure.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm just gonna I connected MetaMask to Remix. I have the storage contract compiled. I'll click deploy. MetaMask is gonna pop up asking for this contract deployment transaction. I'll confirm it. And we'll actually see what was already included here. Let me pull this up. So we have deployment information here. I can see a transaction hash. I'll copy this. I already have the Alpohorax block explorer pulled up from the previous lesson. And let me use the search. Oh, it's too big. There it is. I'm going to paste the transaction hash in here. And I can see 30 seconds ago, this contract was created from this account, which is the account that I just created and funded. So that's how easy it is to deploy a contract using Remix. Another cool thing with Remix is I have this metadata information, which for verifying contracts is really useful. If you want to verify a smart contract on a block explorer, or using sourcify.dev, you can look up ABI deployment bytecode information, just a lot of metadata here. So that's artifacts folder in your contracts. So yeah,
that's perfect. So is there anything specific here thus far that got us to the testnet that required custom parameters for Celo?
Yes, there's one thing specifically. Adding the Alpohorax testnet to MetaMask. That's the one thing.
Yeah,
we actually have.
I did post in the chat chainlist.org. It's my favorite place to search and find information about chains, because there's so many chains and we're in the interoperable world. It's just nice to be able to capture that. And of course, within our docs. First go to our docs, but sharing the love. Chainlist.org is doing a fantastic job, and we're listed on there with all our networks.
Yeah, Joe just beat me to it. Or I beat Joe to it, actually. But yeah, this page will show you how to connect MetaMask to Alpohorax or Celo mainnet or the Baklava testnet. Baklava is more focused on validators and testing of protocol changes. Alpohorax is more for hackathon participants and application developers that are just deploying contracts and then building interfaces connected to those contracts.
Now, Josh, you mentioned the difference between the three network types. The main net is obvious, that's the main network, but why is there a difference between Baklava and Alpohorax? I understand that it's for the validator, but why would developers want to stay away from Baklava for dApp development?
Yeah, so Alpohorax is like mimics mainnet in terms of the functionality and features that are there. Baklava is using like the cutting edge protocol changes. So like if the blockchain team at C Labs adds new features to the protocol and they're testing it on Baklava, like the network could literally like break. It could go down, it could become unusable, blocks could stop being produced, which would be a really bad experience for like hackathon participants that are trying to like rely on these things, send transactions, support contracts, do interactions. But if there's only protocol developers testing the protocol and it breaks, there's no like external party really need Baklava to work. So separating these things is really helpful for like helping us build and test faster.
Amazing. So is it fair to say that if you're interested in cutting edge protocol releases, then Baklava is a potential candidate to play with in regards to a development sandbox?
I'd say it's more like if you are interested in becoming a validator or like contributing to the core protocol, then yeah, definitely get involved with Baklava. Like you can get a whole bunch of Cello, like tens of thousands of Cello to set up a validator on Baklava. And it's actually a prerequisite for becoming a validator on mainnet is to run validators on Baklava, just to show that you can do it and go through like the security best practices and everything. Yeah, as one of our colleagues helps manage that. And yeah, you can learn about basically the newest things coming down the line for the protocol and what it takes for validators to secure.
The good news is if you want to run a local node, it's not needed. You don't need multiple networks. You can just have your local sandbox configured with the test net and then deploy the connection straight to your local node. No need to worry about the validator.
Yeah, I actually have never done that. Because I don't know the protocol updates like before a hard fork on mainnet. They're live on Baklava for maybe several weeks before they go live on mainnet. So yeah, I guess if you are an application developer like building a production service and you want to test some new functionality, you could build like a staging environment that's connected to Baklava, and you could kind of like stage your front end ready to take advantage of the newest features before they're deployed on mainnet. And then when the hard fork happens on mainnet, you can just like plug right in and be good to go.
And so some pros and cons with setting up your own localized environment. Number one, highly customizable. I love the fact that you can set up your own blockchain network, experiment rapidly, and be able to freely transact and monitoring. You can customize the debug response both on the node side and also on the client front end. So that way you can really experience what's happening on both ends of the data channels. But what's interesting is like the time that it takes is like different network types have different capacities in regards to how much they're used for the change, which then impacts the time it takes to synchronize your private environment. And this also depends on where you're at geographically, the type of connection you have with your ISP. But this in itself poses some hurdles. It's like, can you get set up with a full private blockchain with, you know, Celo's test network in, I don't know, let's say like half hour? Is that possible? Probably. Depends on your connection.
Also, it depends on how familiar you are with some of these tools. Like if you've used dApp before, if you have experience setting up like private blockchain networks. If you're new to it, I would say it would take much longer.
Yeah, there's other options out there, right? That's why we have Alpohorax test net readily available. We have a URL string. You can just type it into your connection parameters, be able to get up and running quick, which is super nice. Also, all in our documentation. But anytime that you're ready to play around, work on your development environment, read the docs. Read the docs. They're constantly evolving. New information gets stored, like literally weekly. These are being iterated on. So pay attention to the docs. They have a lot of helpful information, and definitely in regards to like node configuration and so forth. But the truth is, most of the time to run a node and synchronize a chain, and let's say you want a full like archive node, that could take days to weeks to do. And so if you really have a project where you're like, I need this tested now, it needs to be high performance, and you want to control latency, like that's one way of doing it. You can issue tokens. You don't have to depend on certain things like our faucet. Like there's ways that you can score some tokens on your own local environment. But it's certainly not the most rapid in regards to prototype. So rapid prototyping, we have Alpohorax ready to go for you with the URL stream. It's certainly the fastest. Now there's other options out there. And today we're going to be having another streamcast in regards to spinning up a node within 15 minutes. So be on the lookout for that. That's going to be helpful for rapid development with your projects. Okay, Josh, that was super cool. There's some stuff that you showed. I think it's getting underappreciated, right? So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Is this okay? My turn? Okay, sweet. It's like hot potato. My turn. I'm going to share the screen. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Okay, all right. So I just want to emphasize, like, Josh was in Remix. He was able to execute a contract, deploy it using Metamask, a tool that a lot of us are familiar with. And you can change your networks rapidly. Chainlist.org is a fantastic place to switch if you want to just get those parameters into your MetaMask. But here I have a contract that was recently deployed. And one thing that I love about our open source world, sharing code so we can learn from each other, is that you can also, in your smart contract, make it to where you validated it. And what happens is essentially, this is where, if you notice in Remix, you have, let me open up Remix. You have the ability to publish on IPFS. And a lot of folks are like, oh, what's that for? And that helps support the validation process. But luckily for us on Alpohorax, on our block explorer here, you'll notice we have read contract, write contract, and we have code. You have the ability to validate your code and submit what Josh was mentioning earlier was your source code for the contract. And behind the scenes, this is getting uploaded to IPFS. That's exactly what's happening. That's what's going on here. When you upload to IPFS, it's putting your source code and that metadata, so that way the block explorer can go through and validate and verify. And what's going on is each method is being hashed within itself, and that's how we have a method identifier that occurs. And so it's cross-referencing those with the source code, allowing you to view in confidence that you have the right information for the ABI. And the ABI references that hash string for the method. Because after all, computers just speak binary. So deployed bytecode, this is typically what you see on the smart contract. So when you're trying to reverse engineer solutions, I don't know about you, Josh, but I love diving in, checking out smart contracts, seeing what folks are doing. And I highly appreciate when people go through the validation process. It's super simple. You're just going to upload your code, upload your metadata JSON, and you could do that all in Remix, right? Like when you deploy, you have ABI and bytecode down here, but then you get, like what Josh was mentioning earlier, compilation details. And this is where you get all sorts of good information. My favorite, believe it or not, is like, this saves me time. It's like, oh, okay, that's right. This is the hash functions that go to the method, right? So delete name, that's hash function. That's actually what you're going to put into the call when you interact. So I think this is underappreciated, and certainly one of the coolest things that I love in Block Explorers today is just the validation right here, and it's available for anybody. So that was my quick spill on that one. Some other things I love about Remix also is that you can play around with the compiler. So you can change the compiler. Josh was sharing earlier, we have the ability to call out the compiler defaults. You can match these up. Right here on my compiler, I'm testing 8.7. A cool little trick is on the left-hand side, if you're not familiar with Solidity, it kind of goes in a hierarchy from a top-down approach. So first, you're going to start with your development of smart contract. Then you're going to get into compiling smart contract. That green check sign is my favorite. That tells me things are good. And then I go into the next part, which is the deployment and run transactions. And the virtual machine, we have different versions here as well. And you'll notice it says London and Berlin. These are different types of forks that occurred, the upgrades that occurred, which each have different type of protocol enhancements, right? Like obviously, if we're going to upgrade the protocol, there's going to be some changes made, and these changes reflect the compiler compatibility type. So you want to really test out your environment, hone in on what you're targeting. You don't always have to be at the latest and greatest. So just focus on the options that you're trying to provide to your end users, and then just align up your development environment to support the use case. And also, within Remix, you notice we have all these accounts. This is very similar to Ganache, where you can spin it up, which is fully compatible here too. You still can use Ganache when you're going to deploy. Tons of options available, and by far one of my favorite tools, just because it's rapid prototyping. I get to work within the smart contract and then deploy it. So here we deploy. You'll notice that right down here, you have to click the drop down. So it's like kind of grayed out. There's your deployed contract. That's my favorite spot. So here I could say hello, and it's like, hello devs. I love the debugging experience. To me, debugging is gold when it comes down to this stuff. Getting green check boxes mean things are working as expected. And we always can find out the details. Like this is a call to the contract. And then we have the from address, and then a to. And this is the function, right? Like this is the contract, hello, Cello devs, say hello. And then we have the data that's going with it. I always recommend reviewing the debug console because it lets you know what's going on. And so in this case, I'm going to set my name, and we can see, just important information, just making sure that your code is compatible locally before you even touch a blockchain. Some folks like to test in prod. Some folks like to test locally. I'm one of those. So I go here and I say hello. Look, it changed my name, and maybe I want to delete my name. So I delete it, and it goes back to default. Everything's working. I love that. Now my confidence is high. I've tested out the 3 core function or methods that I have in my smart contract. Now it's time to deploy. But what else can you do in Remix that's cool? And it's like, you can inject the Web3 provider. You can use your custom Web3 provider. Whatever, the fact remains is that my favorite part is the compilation details. And if you even go into, Web3 deploy, and it gives you some tips here, like, hey, you want to deploy with your Web3 provider using JavaScript, here you go. It's like, super cool. We love what Remix is doing. This is a fantastic experience. Certainly easier than it was, Josh, before Donut Hard Fork. Before Donut Hard Fork, it was a little bit cumbersome because we were required, in a sense, to have a module for Cello. So now that's been solved. Literally, not much you have to do here to be compatible with your development. So that means that if you find a smart contract, like I was sharing earlier, I was viewing the block explorer, and I'm looking at the code. You literally can copy this code, put it into Remix, start playing with it with your own use case, customize it, hack the holy Toledo out of this contract to make it yours. And then obviously communicate with some friends, some developer friends. You want to get people to review, because once when it comes to prod, you got some security audits you like to do, and things could get more critical, especially when it comes down to having payable methods. So in this case, the thing that's most expensive here in this smart contract example is we're using memory interacting with this contract. That costs a little bit more in gas, but luckily for us with Celo, we're quite affordable when it comes down to gas and interaction with smart contract. Does that mean that we could be sloppy, Josh, with our code?
No.
That's not best practice. You can do away with it. You can be so sloppy because you're like, oh, the gas is cheap. Not good to do. Not good to do. What's your thoughts on that? Any advice?
I mean, yeah, gas is cheap. So I've seen just people optimizing contracts much more rigorously on Ethereum because saving small amounts of gas will save you a lot more money. But yeah, it's not as important on Celo in terms of a cost perspective, but we're still a public blockchain, and like I have seen discussion on Ethereum of like there's a lot of old contracts from like early Ethereum days where people are just deploying contracts as examples on mainnet, and those contracts are still around. And everybody needs to replicate those on all their nodes. I mean, I'm guilty of that. I've deployed contracts in early Ethereum days that are just like hello world contracts that do nothing, and now every node has to keep those in historical state because they can't prune it. So, I mean, there's discussion of like state rent and things like that. I mean, it's more like research for blockchains, but just being cognizant that like when you deploy something on chain or you send transactions, like those will be around for the lifetime of the blockchain. They'll be around forever. So yeah, definitely not a good practice just to like deploy hello world to mainnet just because it's cheap.
Yeah, not best practice. And you know, there's also expenses when you interact with contracts. When you develop a contract that's bloated, it takes more gas. That means every transaction that's occurring is costing everybody more token funds, and that too for your users. That's not fair to them that they're using that. So that's another reason why you want to optimize your code. In the examples that we're sharing on the screen, these are just examples, not fully optimized. As a matter of fact, if you were to look at that contract that I was sharing on my screen, it even says, because I validated the contract, even says it's not optimized. So you know right away that this code needs some work. And that's another nice little tip.
I will say for hackathons though, like even on Ethereum, I say if folks can deploy to mainnet, I definitely recommend it because it's a lot more impactful and meaningful when like you can share a project with in a hackathon submission where with a URL and an interface that's like, hey, this is live on mainnet and you can play with it right now. It's like way more real. And then when you do your presentation, like I've seen presentations at ETH Denver. I think Pull Together was actually ETH Denver hackathon submission, and now it's like one of the most popular products on Ethereum. And people just like started interacting with it on mainnet just because they code. So if you show something in your final hackathon submission and like you're doing a demo of it, people will just start playing with it, and sometimes it will go viral. Like I've seen stuff go viral from hackathons, but it's not going to go viral if it's on mainnet or if it's on the DevNet. So that is a case to be deploying on mainnet, and you learn by doing it. So like I wouldn't be overly cautious about it because like deploying on mainnet, I've learned about deploying contracts on Ethereum mainnet by spending a lot of money on contracts that I don't use anymore. It's just like part of the learning experience. So.
So funny you say that. Obviously, different developers have different best practices that they form. We use this word best practices. I think I pinged you yesterday. I was like, best practice, and I like edited my message. I'm like, no. That might be my best practice. That doesn't mean it's industry best practice, right? So we have our own.
It's like preference more than actual best practice. When we say best practice, like they're usually standards that have helped other people in the past avoid problems. So it's like people are generally trying to share things that they've learned to help other people avoid the same mistakes. So Brandy, you might have done things that I haven't learned from those mistakes yet. So I have yet to learn by testing on prod, but yeah, so it goes.
People love testing on prod. It's kind of trendy, but not for me. I'm like old school. I like the back-end service side. I love command prompt. I love testing things out. You know, Josh, when I first started, I was all node crazy. I wanted to experiment with a node and play. And one reason why I love doing that is because I can break it freely. I don't have to worry about nothing. I can be as expensive as I want. It's super fun. Hey, so we kind of showed folks how you can rapidly prototype using Remix, using Metamask to deploy to the testnet, right? And we also showed how you can go ahead and validate your code utilizing both the smart contract source code and the metadata that's in JSON, formatted in JSON, to validate the code for these block explorers, which is really nice for other people out there. Josh, do you think it would be a good time now to maybe touch base on Truffle, because it's different methods for deploying? Any advice on Truffle?
Yeah, I actually just did, this was part of the Celo camp presentation I did, and I see it relates to Joe's question around deploying. He said, would deploying from Remix be considered a valid submission for the hackathon? I would say yes. Any way you get your contracts onto mainnet or testnet, I don't particularly care how you do it. Remix is just a lightweight, easy way to do it. And then, yeah, Truffle is going into the second part of the question, which is, are there other tools I can use? Truffle is a contract deployment manager. I'll actually pull up my screen again, just because I have it open. I can do Windows this time because we're not going to be using Remix, so it's a little more focused. So I have a contracts lesson here. I have a Truffle directory that shows kind of how Truffle's set up. Someone asked me in the previous workshop why you would use Truffle over Remix. And one of the big advantages of using Truffle is, it's all in your code editor, so it's like more persistent. I am nervous about keeping contracts that I am working on in my browser because sometimes it just gets deleted or like Remix freezes and I can't load it like you saw. So just having it managed in a GitHub repo using your code editor of choice and using version control is super helpful. Also with Truffle, so like with Truffle, I can write contracts here. I have a Hello World contract, super simple. There's also this concept of migration scripts. So you can create multiple steps in a migration script. Like let's say you have 20 contracts that are all going to interact with each other, and like the earlier contracts need to be deployed and the later contracts need information from the previous contracts in the deployment process. You can create very complex migration workflows using Truffle that are scripted using something. This is super simple because I'm just deploying one contract. But you can build a whole logic tree here that pulls in previous deployment information. So you can get really complex with this, and then it's persistent, and it's a one-line command to deploy. So that's one big advantage of using Truffle. Brandy talked about the metadata files on like compiled contracts. Truffle has a similar concept. It puts these in this build directory here. In this file, I have like the contract ABI. There's deployment bytecode, and then there's also a lot of this information I never look at. But in this Truffle script, there's this networks field at the bottom of the file, and this will save all of your historical migrations to every network that you've ever deployed to, which is super helpful. So like I've deployed this contract to the Alpohorax testnet, chain ID 44787, but if I deploy to Ethereum mainnet, that will be saved. If I deploy to Celo mainnet, that will be saved. So like I have all of my historical deployments saved in these files as well, in a place where I'm more confident that I won't lose this information. So what I say is like, I often use Remix more for like hacking things together on simple contracts. Truffle and Hardhat as well are more for like project development, more complex contract development, things that are actually like production grade where you need to save historical migrations and things like that. And it's a little bit more work to get set up with, but Truffle has a command line tool. You can just run Truffle init. It will create the boilerplate for this directory.
No, I'm so sorry. It's worth mentioning that right here, this JSON file that was produced for the Hello World JSON file includes all the information needed to validate your smart contract with any block explorer. So or any validation process. You just literally need the two files in this case, this validity source code and in this file. So you drag and drop those two files into the block explorer, and that starts a validation process. A little tip that I learned is that it sometimes will be spinning at circles in the background. It's already validated. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact of the communications between the block explorer itself and IPFS. But if you do a reload, you'll notice that your contract gets validated. So right here, we have some scaffolding that Truffle does. I think this is probably one of the largest value points with Truffle is that if you're not a smart contract developer, there is a command line flags that you can use for automatic scaffolding of smart contracts, all in Truffle in the command line.
Yep. And I just want to point out like the one configuration piece that you need to manage, like because Truffle again is like an Ethereum developer tool. So you need to configure it manually to connect to a Celo network endpoint. But it's not that hard to do. I'll go over that real quick, Brandy, if that's cool. There's this file called Truffle config.js. And the way that I've done it in this example is I'm bringing in the Web3 JS package. This Truffle config.js file, I can just install this with npm install Web3. And then I'm pulling in my environment file where I have a private key stored. And then I'm pulling in HD wallet provider by Truffle. And then in this networks configuration section, I'm defining like Celo mainnet and Alpohorax. And what I'm doing with this provider is using I guess it's important to note that I'm not running a node locally. I'm connecting to a remote node that's going to broadcast my transactions to the network. So I need to sign all my transactions with Truffle before I send them to the network. That includes my contract deployment transactions. So when I create this provider using a wallet provider, I just send it my private key. So Truffle knows, so Truffle can sign the contract deployment transaction, and then I tell Truffle where to send this transaction. I'm just connecting to the Alpohorax instance of Forno, which is like the node service that's just like a API endpoint that will receive my signed transaction and broadcast it to the network. So then if I wanted to run a migration, I have my migration script defined in this migrations directory, and I can just run Truffle migrate, and then a network flag, pass, Alpohorax, and we'll see Truffle do its magic.
And a cool call out here is that on his screen, you can see the network big file and it shows Alpohorax. So as soon as you do the flag -- network, you're saying, hey, Truffle, let's connect to this preferred network provider. And you can tailor that any way you want. You can just go ahead and expand it. If you're going to be working with 15 chains, well, enjoy. All you have to do is use the config flag network and switch networks on the fly. Super cool.
Yeah, I just got some errors because I actually have several directories in this example. I was in the web page directory, which I could show quickly. It's like the most simple web page you could create that connects to a contract. Mm-hmm. And it didn't actually deploy because I just deployed this in the last workshop. But if I pass the reset flag, Truffle will actually detect if there's no changes to any of your contracts or deployments and you run Truffle migrate, it's not going to do it again because it's going to cost you money. It's like you're trying to run something that you don't actually need to do, so Truffle protects you from doing that. You might see that a lot in developing on the testnet, but you can pass the reset flag and it will just force deploy again. So we can see Truffle's actually running the migration script. It's running the first script, the initial migration script, which deploys the migrations contract, which helps track all of the subsequent contract migrations. And then it's running the deploy contracts migration script, which is replacing the hello world contract with a new one. And it prints all this transaction information, transaction hash, block data, accounts, and the total cost. You can see like it's printing the cost in ETH, but this is the real cost is in Celo. So this is deployment cost like 1 or 10,000 of the Celo. So it's super cheap. Let me stop sharing real quick. I'm going to share my full screen so we can look at this in the Explorer, just so we can see the stuff happening in real time. So yeah, this contract deployment just happened a minute ago. It created this new contract and the Celo World contract.
And perfect. Since your code's not validated, you want to show what it looks like when you go to the code section on the contract?
Yep. It's just the deployment bytecode.
So it's like impossible, literally, for anybody to go in there and figure out what methods to use in your smart contract from this point. Like if you're trying to set up a duplicate ABI, for instance, it's really hard to do on this screen.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, this is illegible. You guys have no idea what this contract is. You have no idea how to like interface with this. I would need to send you the ABI in order to like basically interpret this code for any SDK that wants to use it. Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, all that information is in this. Yeah, hello JSON file. The bytecode's up here.
It's also worth mentioning, I don't believe the smart contract that deployed is in this file. So if you were to have an error in your development environment, something was to happen, you wipe away your local cache, you might lose access to your smart contract. Now with our platform, not that big a deal because you can like redeploy because it's portable, but I've experienced on Ethereum where that redeploy can cost easily $40, $50. And it's like, oh, goodness gracious. So if you lose your contract address, like the tip of advice is anytime that you deploy, copy the contract address, take note of it. That's like number one. If you lose it and you need to find it, go through your transaction history and look for contact creation, and then follow the blockchain rabbit hole to reclaim your contract address and save you those unnecessary spent funds on redeploying.
Yeah.
Cool stuff. Well, thank you so much, Josh, for that quick run through. Do you mind if I share a slide deck and just go over like what you just did basically in Truffle? I set up a quick slide deck to go through the go through the steps, just for folks that are not like fluent with Truffle, but they're curious, they want to start Truffle. Maybe you're like a Web 2 developer and like Truffle looks really cool. By the way, Truffle is like totally centered around merging Web 2 to Web 3 for development, which I absolutely love. So I have this quick little slide deck. Oh, let's see, maybe I can make it look a little better. Okay, hopefully that looks a little better on the screen. I think we're good. So when you're getting started with Truffle, it's like the very first thing you want to do is make sure that you configure the Truffle environment, right? So that starts with Truffle is a framework. All right. So what you're going to want to do is configure your Truffle, get that framework installed within your project directory. Then you're going to modify the Truffle framework and then include some configurations to the local environment like testnet and mainnet. Configure your network connectivity. You're going to define your contract, compiler preferences for Solidity. That's an option. There's so many options in there. When you implement Truffle, you have the ability to look at the scaffolding. There's a lot of cool hints all inside the Truffle once when you first instantiate it. And then we're going to deploy a smart contract and then interact with the smart contract. So I'm going to go through this quickly. This kind of touches base and relates with what Josh just shared. Okay. So to configure the Truffle environment, a lot of times you want to check if you already have Truffle installed, check your Truffle version. You can do an npm install in the global environment, and you always can control your version code. You're not stuck with the latest release of Truffle. And the reason why this is important, if you're working on another project, you went to a GitHub repo and you download a project, but you're having, I don't know, format errors with JSON as a response in your debug console, try backdating Truffle. A lot of times that works. There might be an incompatibility somewhere, and it could very well just be in the different types of network upgrades that have occurred in regards to the protocol. So backdating is something you do quickly to get back up and running on any project that you're working with by yourself or with team members. So then you're going to want to create a blank directory and then initialize Truffle init. So next, you're going to have some project dependency, something that Josh was alluding to. He brought in HD wallet provider, and that's where you're going to manage your wallet. That's going to manage your private strings. So you can restore using wallet words. In the background, that's just using like bit39 to go ahead and convert that to private public keys. And then it's going to use that private key, obviously, for signing transactions and interacting with contract. So you need something to manage that. You could go the long way and try creating yourself, but why? We have fantastic tools available, and the space is constantly maturing. All right, so then you're going to create your contract. We showed you how to do that quickly. Remix is one of the fastest ways to create your contracts especially working with Celo, there's literally nothing that you need to do. If you have Metamask, if you have your favorite Web3 provider, if you want to experiment and craft your own way to deploy, feel free. Remix is rapid. Get in there, create your smart contract. For Truffle, this complements so well because if you're comfortable in Solidity, Remix is like one of your best friends. You can just prototype it, test out your contract. Now you can get into how you're going to configure your Truffle environment. Or you can just start straight into Truffle and take advantage of the scaffolding flags that are available to implement various smart contracts. And then, of course, next you want to deploy it. And Josh was mentioning this. This is all in the migrations folder. You're going to create a deployment script specifically named like step 2, deploy contract with JS. And then I have some example code here. It's literally, you're just setting up a variable and then you're requiring the smart contract. So you can call the smart contract by its name, obviously without the .sol. It's going to look in the appropriate directory, which is called contracts. And this becomes an artifact. And then what we're doing next is we're setting up a deployer to deploy that contract. And then you can put any additional contracts in there. You're not just stuck with having to do it one. You don't have to keep on creating multiple deploy contracts.js. It's not like you do 3_deploy, 4_deploy. No, you can just put it all right in here and line on down and have a group of deployments. Next, configuring Celo networks and Truffle config.js. Josh alluded to this. You saw on his screen, he had his local sandbox created for local. In this case, I called it private. You can rename freely, like, hey, this is open source world. You're allowed to go in here and make any changes you want and tailor it. I do want to call out the fact that the default is development. And this is a keyword that's specific in Truffle. So when you take away development, like I did here with private, what's going to end up happening is that Truffle, if you don't use the command line flag for networks, it's kind of confused, like, hey, I don't have the default development environment, because that is the default for Truffle when it comes down to deployments. That's why best practice on my end, and this is what we touched base on earlier, Josh. I know Josh has some interesting preferences as well as I do. I like to always use the network flag and know exactly what network I'm interfacing with, because I don't want a mistake to occur, especially if there's value on the wallet that I have attached to the deployment strategy. Okay, moving forward, we have configure Celo networks, and then you can put in testnet, mainnet. You can grow this out any way you want. The biggest information, as you've seen, is making sure you just put in the network ID. That's like the number one, is having the correct network ID, and then you have your string for connecting. So here we're returning the new HD wallet provider. So it's new. We're instantiating the HD wallet provider with the mnemonic wallet words. Okay, so that way it can get the private key and create the identity. And then we put the string in for the connectivity. That's connectivity RPC console. So here can be anything, and anything that's going to accept an RPC response. That's where if you're having a local sandbox, obviously you're going to put those parameters here. That was like to the tone of this previous deck 127.0.0.1 as an IP address as your local host. You even put local host. All right, moving. I know I'm going quick here. All right, this is kind of rehashing what Josh already shared, but configuring compilers, this is something I recently came across, and we're still testing this, but it's worth mentioning that you can customize compilers. The Sol-C, that's a Solidity compiler. In the contract instance I was working on, I had 0.8 as my target. I put that in there as my target. Sure enough, it was compatible. The default, I think, was 0.5. I'm not using Docker. That's fault. In Optimizer, that's where you can put in the optimizer. So if you were to review that smart contract code that I showed on the Block Explorer on the validation process, it's not optimized. This is where you would set in the optimize. A simple command flag saying true for a Boolean would auto generate optimization. And then I think this is something that's really worth mentioning is EVM version. There's different versions. We alluded to that earlier. You have different versions of the blockchain in regards to the protocol layer, as it enhances. Different naming conventions are utilized to reference the type of protocol version that you're interfacing with. Istanbul, well, it's a little older one. In my use case, I felt comfortable. Like I mentioned, I wasn't using anything that was latest and greatest. So I went with the safeguard here and utilized an older version of the EVM. Next, after you do that, you have your deploy migrate. It's simple. We've already touched base network. flag and then select your type of network. And then when you want to utilize debugging, this is one of my favorite parts with Truffle console. And then you also need to use the network flag because now you're jumping into the console and you're saying, hey, Truffle, let's go into a console. I want to interact with the smart contract, but it needs to know the network, okay? And best practice on my end, I'm just advising my best practice. Like, I love using the network. It just keeps things clean, especially when you're experimenting with things that actually have value in place. So then now you want to access your deployed contract instance in Truffle. And this is one of the fastest ways to debug, by the way, because you're not even worrying about the front end user interface. Everybody has different best practices for how they implement a front end. They have different preferences for how you want to set up your front end stack. It could get complicated quickly as those dependencies stack up on each other. That's why I love utilizing Truffle console, because you can just go right in there, get a response, and know if you're interacting correctly. Take note of all these, all the responses, iterate as needed, and then you can start going into your development with the full stack or the front end with confidence. So I love doing that. These are some results that you can look forward to in the Truffle console. In this instance, you see right on the top, hello devs. That was the first because I called the function to return instance.say hello. That's the method. You notice I'm not have to constantly add in the ABI here because Truffle's doing that under the hood. Typically, when you set up interaction with a contract, you need to have your Web3 provider or any other provider like Metamask now is Ethereum.provider. And then you have to set up a contract instance. And that's going to require the contract address and the ABI. And what Truffle's doing here is like the console is made to support your debugging and development of your project, and it's made to react swiftly. And this is an example of that. You don't have to worry about the ABI. It's doing all that underneath the hood. You're literally interfacing with your smart contract that's on chain, by the way. Like this was live, this is on chain, and you're getting the results in real time here. I always love reviewing these results. I love playing with it. It helps out, boosts my confidence that I'm doing the right things. I just want to share quickly. That's it. Let me stop sharing my screen. Last time I did this, I got kicked out. Wow. I didn't do nothing. Somebody kicked it off. Sweet. Thank you very much. All the different streaming networks, Josh, it's like, my goodness, you got to give permissions. They're getting more complicated than some of these blockchain networks.
Yeah. Well, you need a blockchain-based identity to just single log on for everything, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's been around for ages, private public keys. And it's finally now becoming more standardized and definitely the preferred way to access sensitive information.
Well, blockchains, there's direct incentive to create a private key, public key pair, right? That's your account. Yeah, it's how you store your assets. So, I mean, yeah, cryptocurrency has been the best thing for adoption of public key cryptography ever. Which is amazing. Yeah.
I was reviewing a report the other day that on the S-curve for blockchain adoption, one of the fastest in technology, faster than mobile phones, faster than anything that we've ever seen in regards to the adoption cycle on an S-curve. It just blows my mind.
Well, there's literally direct financial incentive to do it, right? I mean, we haven't seen that with technology before. I mean, maybe with mobile phones, a little bit more abstract, even like Web 1.0 and 2.0, it's like less obvious direct incentive. I mean, there's incentive, but it was less, Yes. It is crazy how quickly it's moving.
I'm loving it. I'm loving it.
It's definitely entertaining. I mean, there's no shortage of interesting things going on in this space, in this industry. So
it just reminds me of the internet with fax machines. And it's like, all right, we had web version 1, which was very static. Then we had Web 2.0, which gave us dynamic elements. Now with Web 3, like we have Web 3 as a standard provider for naming convention, but I also look at Web 3 as a signal that this is the next generation of the internet. And it's just so cool to be part of this revolution. It literally is. And then on the mobile side, with our platform, the development options, it's just insane how fast that we're moving. Our roadmap is intense, and the protocol layer is really geared towards mobile. It's not just a design side of mobile. This is like at the protocol base layer, assisting with your connectivity. So when you do a dApp, it's like you're getting all this additional benefits of a platform as a mobile first platform for you as a developer, for your users. And as the platform scales, so does your app. That's huge.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been fun, Josh. Thank you so much. Today we went over quickly rapid prototyping with Remix, how you can deploy with MetaMask, some creative ways to utilize those chain IDs to switch chain between mainnet, testnet. Then we dived into Truffle quickly, went through an overview of how you can utilize Truffle. Also touched based on validation of smart contracts on a block explorer. My goodness, this was jam-packed. Well done. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and we went over tons of stuff really quickly. So if you guys have questions, like Brandy and I are both on Discord. You can ping me. I'm Josh C. Pipe C Labs. So just tag me with questions. There's a lot of channels there, so it's hard for me to monitor all of them. But happy to talk more about this stuff and share resources or any questions you guys have. So
yep. Well
yeah,
said.
I am doing office hours this afternoon, 3 p.m. Eastern time. On Discord, if you scroll to the top of the channel list, there's this new feature where you can actually create events in Discord. So there's events listed there. I have events for this afternoon and then Friday morning Eastern time as well. And I'll be adding those for the coming weeks. So they're easy to find in Discord. And that's just a public channel. So come hang out. There may be people already there. There may not be. We can talk about development. We can talk about blockchain. We can talk about gardening. I like gardening. We can talk about whatever. It's just community time where we hang out. So I hope to see you there.
Oh, that's awesome. Supply chain management in your garden with Josh. No? All right, Josh, you have a good
Yeah, maybe we can figure out what that means. You too, Brandy.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.